My boss made me train my replacement. He said it like it was nothing. Like he was telling her the copier was jammed. Like he was mentioning that the coffee was fresh. Like the information he was delivering wasn't the kind that changes a person's entire day, week, life. He said, "We're bringing in someone new. I'm going to need you to get her up to speed." And then he looked back at his computer. Meeting over. Her name was Diane Kowalski. 14 years with Hartwell Manufacturing. 14 years of arriving early and leaving late. 14 years of covering shifts, solving problems nobody else wanted to touch, and learning every corner of a mid-size industrial supply company outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, until she knew it the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not just the organs but the nerves, the vessels, the small things that keep everything alive. She was 51 years old. She had a daughter in community college, and a mortgage with 9 years left on it. She was not, as it turned out, the kind of woman who cried at work. She saved that for the parking lot. Her boss was a man named Greg Patton. You've met Greg Patton, not this specific Greg but the type, the kind of manager who takes credit the way other people take breath, automatically, constantly, without thinking about it. The kind of man who calls himself a leader because he once read a book about leadership on a flight to a conference where he mostly talked about himself. Greg had been at Hartwell for 6 years. Diane had trained him too, though neither of them said that out loud anymore. Greg made $30,000 more than Diane per year. When she'd asked about a raise 18 months earlier, he'd told her the budget was tight. The budget, as it turned out, was not tight. Not for everyone. The new girl's name was Priya Anand. She was 29, an MBA from Michigan State. She had the kind of calm, focused energy that either means someone is very confident or very disciplined, and in Priya's case it was both. She'd taken the job knowing it was a lateral move, industry-wise, but she'd done her research on Hartwell and she believed in the product line. She also had no idea what she was walking into. On her first morning, Greg introduced her to the floor, showed her the org chart, and said, "Diane is going to get you fully oriented. She knows where everything is." He said it generously, like he was giving Diane a gift. Diane smiled. The smile cost her something, but she paid it. What Greg expected was a handoff. A 2-week download of basic information, passwords and procedures, where the files lived, who to call when the freight system went down, professional, minimal, the kind of knowledge transfer that checks a box and leaves the new person to figure the rest out on their own. That is not what Diane did. Diane made a decision on that first morning, quietly, privately, without telling anyone, that if she was going out the right way, not because Greg deserved her effort, not because the company deserved her loyalty, but because Priya Anand had done nothing wrong, and Diane was not the kind of woman who punished the innocent for the sins of the guilty. She taught Priya everything. Not just everything Greg knew she knew. Everything. She started with the systems. The inventory software that the IT department had officially replaced 2 years ago, but that 3 key vendors still used to submit orders. The workaround Diane had built, a manual bridge between the old and new platforms that kept roughly 40% of their client relationships functioning. The bridge that existed nowhere in any official documentation because Diane had built it on a weekend, on her own time, because Greg had told her the transition would be seamless, and it wasn't, and someone had to fix it. "This is extraordinary," Priya said on the second day, staring at the spreadsheet. "It's held together with tape," Diane said, "but it works. Why isn't this in the official documentation?" Diane looked at her. "Because Greg doesn't know it exists." She taught her the clients next. Not the names and account numbers, those were in the system, the real information, that Martin Buis at Cascade Fabrication called every Thursday afternoon and needed to hear a human voice or he'd take his contract elsewhere, and that his contract was worth $340,000 annually. that the purchasing manager at Lake Erie Industrial had a standing request for early Friday invoicing that wasn't in any formal agreement but had been honored for 11 years and would cause a crisis if anyone stopped, that there were 17 clients like this, informal, undocumented understandings that kept real money in the building. Priya took notes on everything. On the third day, she stopped Diane mid-sentence and said, "None of this is written down anywhere, is it?" "No," Diane said. "What happens when you leave?" Diane didn't answer that. She just kept going. It was on the sixth day that Priya found the discrepancy. She'd been going through vendor invoices. Diane had handed her 3 years of files, and she stopped at a line item that didn't match. A freight vendor called North Star Logistics. Monthly invoices, consistent, $8,000 to $11,000 per month, standard for their volume. Except Priya had worked in logistics before. And the rates on the North Star invoices were approximately 30% higher than market rate for their region and shipping weight. She didn't say anything immediately. She went back further, pulled more files, built a comparison spreadsheet, checked carrier rate databases. The numbers didn't lie. Hartwell Manufacturing had been overpaying North Star Logistics by somewhere between $2,800 and $4,200 per month for at least 3 years. She brought it to Diane after hours, when Greg had already left. Diane looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then she said, "Pull his expense reports." Priya looked at her. "Greg's expense reports," Diane said. "The last 3 years you have access now. I made sure of that." "Why?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "Because North Star Logistics was Greg's vendor recommendation," she said. "He brought them in personally, and there's a man named Dale Patton who owns 40% of North Star Logistics." Priya was still. "Dale Patton," she said. "Greg's brother," Diane said. The room was very quiet. Outside, the Michigan wind moved against the windows. They didn't rush. This was important. This is the part of the story where a lot of people would have moved fast, sent an email, made an accusation, gone straight to HR with smoke, and called it fire. Anger makes people reckless, and they had reason for anger. But Diane had been in corporate environments for 25 years. And Priya had an MBA and a temperament like a closed fist. They moved carefully. Over the next 2 weeks, while Diane continued the official onboarding, while Greg continued to believe everything was proceeding on his terms, they built a file, invoices, rate comparisons, Greg's expense reports, which showed 3 years of vendor relationship meals with North Star representatives totaling over $14,000, all approved by Greg himself, a paper trail that didn't require interpretation, that didn't need a prosecutor, that simply needed to be read by someone with authority. They organized it into a single PDF. 63 pages. Priya had a contact in Hartwell's parent company, a corporate auditor she'd met at a conference 2 years earlier, not a close friend, a professional contact, the right professional contact. She sent the PDF on a Thursday evening. She CC'd Diane. Neither of them slept well that night. Corporate moved faster than either of them expected. Within 10 days, 2 auditors arrived from the parent company's Chicago office. They were quiet, professional, and thorough in the way that people are thorough when they already know what they're going to find and are simply collecting the documentation to act on it. Greg was called into a meeting on a Wednesday morning. He did not come back to his desk. His personal items were shipped to his house. There is a particular silence that settles over an office when a manager is removed. It is not a happy silence exactly. It is something more complicated, relief and discomfort and the strange unease of watching someone's story end badly, even if they wrote that ending themselves. Diane sat at her desk that Wednesday afternoon and felt the silence. She thought about 14 years. She thought about the parking lot. She thought about a lot of things. Priya came and sat on the edge of her desk. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Priya said, "You knew about North Star, you already knew." Diane was quiet. "I suspected," she said. "For about 2 years, I had no proof and no access and no reason anyone would have believed me." Priya nodded slowly. "You waited for someone who could see it from the outside." Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. The promotions came 6 weeks later. Priya was offered a regional operations role, a position 2 levels above the job she'd been hired for. She negotiated well, she always did. Diane was offered the department management position that Greg had held, with a salary adjustment. $32,000 more than she had been making. She signed the offer letter on a Friday afternoon, alone at her desk after everyone else had gone home. She sat for a moment with the signed letter in front of her. Then she took out her phone and called her daughter. She didn't explain everything, just said there was good news, said things had shifted, said she was okay. Her daughter said, "Mom, are you crying?" Diane looked out the window at the parking lot. "No," she said, "not tonight." Priya stops by Diane's office most mornings now. They don't always talk about work. Sometimes it's just coffee and a few minutes and the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. Diane is finishing the official documentation of all the systems she built over 14 years. The manual bridges, the client protocols, the 17 informal understandings that kept the money flowing. She's putting it all in writing, so the next person doesn't have to carry it alone. Greg Patton is not with Hartwell anymore. North Star Logistics lost their contract. Some things end the way they should. Not often enough.